Welcome everyone to the Intersectionality panel at NAACL. I'm really glad to have you here, and maybe more people are going to sort of show up, but I'd like to get us started since we have a lot of really good content that we want to get through in this hour. So I'm going to start by introducing our wonderful panelists that I'm really excited to have here. So I'm going to start with Alex. Alex is a deaf, queer, Chinese Canadian whose community activism focuses on building connections between disability and queer communities. He has previously been a board director for the BC Rainbow Alliance of the Deaf, the Frank Theatre Company, and OPIRG-Toronto, where he advocated for accessibility reforms and disability culture visibility. He's also worked as a freelance journalist, and his work has covered topics like intersectional deaf experiences and has investigated accessibility issues. He recently completed his PhD in computer science at the University of Toronto, so congratulations on that. And he's going to start as a senior researcher at Microsoft Research this fall. And he's going to work on practical machine learning methods for computational biology. Our second panelist is Arjun, who is a brown, queer, agender incoming PhD student at the University of California, Los Angeles. Their research focuses on graph representation learning, fairness, and ML ethics. They're also a core organizer of Queer in AI. They co-founded Queer Hacks, and they teach machine learning and AI ethics at Title I schools in LA. They also really love to run, hike, observe and document wildlife, and play the ukulele. And we talk about birds sometimes, which is really fun. I love when they send me bird pictures. And our third panelist is Candace Ross, who is a Black woman and PhD student at MIT in CSAIL. Someone has, right, so you only see Kate. Perhaps I need to spotlight other people as well, or you need to switch to the gallery view.
I have her pinned, so if you want to change it, then I don't mind. I think so. Basically, I think you would have to remove the spotlight, and I can individually pin her down.
Sure, I can do that.
Okay.
I will remove the spotlight. So hopefully that works for people now. Let me know in the chat if it doesn't work, and I'm going to restart Candace's bio. So Candace Ross is a Black woman and PhD student at MIT in CSAIL. And she works on multimodal language models and is particularly interested in models that draw on theories of child language acquisition. And in her free time, she does gymnastics, she plays pickup lacrosse, and hunts down more houseplants to buy, which I think is really cute. And I guess we see one of the houseplants in the background, which is awesome. We were also going to have a fourth panelist, Nikita Srivatsan. But unfortunately, an emergency came up for her and she won't be able to make it today, which I'm sad about because she had a lot of really cool things to say. But in any case, we hope to see her at a future event. And I guess I should introduce myself as well. I am a queer Indian Canadian agender person, and I've also lived in Singapore. And I get really excited about language and code and birds. I'm particularly fascinated in like the subtle differences in how we use language. And I use this in my sort of job as a speech recognition engineer at Dialpad. And in my free time, I like to sing, I like to play piano, and I like to go birding. So welcome to the panel. Thank you for sort of being here. And Fred says the option for gallery view is grayed out. Interesting. Let's see if we can fix this. I did not expect to have technical issues, but I suppose we can try and fix that. I wonder what happens if I try to spotlight multiple people. I'm going to see if this works, and if it doesn't, then we'll have to figure it out.
It's a lot of work, but I wonder if there's is it an option to enable the gallery view or?
So I don't remember disabling it. And I'm trying now to sort of spotlight all of us, and hopefully this works. It sounds like this works. Okay, perfect.
Okay, right,
So I think I spotlighted each person individually. So we have all of the panelists, and we have Kate, our interpreter, all spotlighted. So hopefully this works. All right. So thank you for being here. Thank you for patiently dealing with our technical issues. We are here, of course, to discuss intersectionality, which many of you may have heard about, but I will sort of define anyway. It is basically a framework that was created by Kimberly Crenshaw, and it posits that having multiple marginalized identities can have a compounding effect on your experiences. So people typically think of marginalized identities as being things like gender, race, sexuality, but there's a lot of things in this framework that are considered. So things like class, poverty, appearance, and various other factors are even caste are also considered in sort of the different ways in which your marginalized identities intersect with each other. Sometimes these intersections can empower, and other times these intersections can oppress. So intersectionality is not simply about victimization or oppression. It is just about a different way of looking in a less siloed way at identity. So here we have 4 people. 4 of us are sort of in the field of NLP or adjacent in sort of machine learning. And I don't think any of us really has a background in critical race theory or feminism, which is sort of where this comes from, critical race studies. And yet most people that I know who exist at an intersection in society really feel that intersectionality as a framework resonates with them and helps them explain a lot about their experiences. Certainly this has been the case for me. And so I guess I'm curious to ask all of the panelists, what is your relationship with the concept of intersectionality? What does it mean to you? How has it helped you make sense of your lives? You can also sort of touch on the 2 aspects of what are the ways in which your intersectional identities have empowered you versus what are the ways in which they sort of compound your oppression. So Alex, I would love to start with you.
Sure, okay. So a bit about my background. My parents are immigrants from China, and when they first came to Canada, they experienced a lot of racism. So my mom even has a story of when she was due with me. So she went to the hospital, right? And the nurse actually, all right, so basically what happened was that I was due on the same day that my sister was born. And the nurse would actually refuse to admit my mom because she said that, well, you only want your second child to be born on the same day, so you would not have to pay for 2 birthday cakes going forward. And of course, everyone knows that Asians are cheap. So basically, that's one of the major formative experiences that she had being in Canada then. So there were also survivors of the Cultural Revolution back in China. And basically putting those 2 pieces together, I think the way that they really responded to racism was that they really heavily embraced the modern minority myth. So they really want to keep the head down low, achieve, and just kind of assimilate into Canadian culture then. And so when they had me, I had my disability from a very young age. One of the ways that really compounded so that adherence to the modern minority myth, but in addition to that generational trauma that my parents had, is that they also tried to encourage me to keep my head down low when it came to disability, because that was the way of surviving and navigating in the world then. And so what they didn't realize at the time was that this really played into a bit of a cultural war around disability. So there is a lot in a culture that coerces disabled people into ways of living that are not really the best for them personally, and then ask them to make a lot of sacrifices, but they try to reduce how disabled a person looks. So for example, a really good example of this is ABA therapy for autistic people. And what that is basically is that it's actually directly inspired by Skinner's box. So basically that's a psychological experiment where they put rats in a cage and they would shock the rats in order to like push a lever or to get food and everything. So basically it is about masking someone's behaviors and then inflicting punishment or rewards on them instead of actually like getting them to understand like what like it will behave like in a way that is intuitive to them. So basically, the way that impacted me was that I'm deaf, and there's a lot of energy invested in getting deaf people to pass as able-bodied. So we speak, and I'm talking right now, right? And I had to make a lot of sacrifices for that. So there was a lot of ableist advice from medical experts and from other parents that is not really scientific rooted. And basically what it says is that in order to get deaf children to talk, you can't expose them to any other language. So you can't expose them to sign language, but in this case, you can't expose them to Chinese at all. So I did not get to learn Chinese because of that advice. And I also did not learn sign language later in life, because again, of this obsession of getting disabled people to pass as able-bodied and how that really interacted with my parents' culture. And just like briefly, I also saw these themes being more later in life when I came out to my parents as queer. So they really wanted me to hold that to myself and not come up with that as well. And so one of the things that I would say about intersectionality is that being at the nucleus of all of these intersecting identities has really helped me see the perils in which people are oppressed, right? I think a really common tool is to ask people to take on sacrifices and to coerce them into passing as the norm and default, to pass as able-bodied, to pass as white, to pass as straight. So as someone who experiences all of these things, it really helped me see like the patterns and then realize this is not just like a systematic, this is not just an isolated thing, but it's really a systematic tool that's designed to oppress like many different people then.
Absolutely. Yeah. Seeing all of those parallels between the different sort of components of your experiences really shows you, yeah, how they intersect really affects your life in a very different way. Arjun, I would love for you to go next. I know that, you have some similar feelings about the intersection of culture and various aspects of your identity. So I'm very curious how intersectionality has impacted your life.
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts, a little bit scattered, but I'll try my best to kind of keep it coherent. I think I want to start off with how intersectionality has definitely it can explain my privilege in a lot of ways. Like I do want to address my positionality in all of this. Like I am, Indian American in tech, and I'm male presenting, and I grew up in Cupertino, California, like 2 streets away from Apple headquarters. I saw like an Apple office space on the way to school. And I obviously had computer science classes in my high school. And that was really something that helped me get in to this field of working in artificial intelligence. At the same time, I think just because of the whole Indian American, fit the mold of being a nerd, kind of male presenting, I was brought into this in-group within my high school of these other Indian American male presenting nerds. But that also really opened me up to a lot of very racist, sexist, homophobic discourse, which at the time, even though I wasn't even really out to myself and I was still very closeted, it definitely kept me closeted for 5 more years than it should have taken for me to come out, because I didn't really see myself as a scientist if I was queer. I saw myself as I needed to fit that mold of Indian American male presenting in order to be a scientist. And I think this is also really very related to intersectionality, because I did know about queer people, but every queer person I saw on the news was white. And so I didn't really think that I could be queer. I didn't think that was physically possible, despite how irrational that sounds. And this is actually one of the main reasons that I started Queer Hacks, because I was there's so many amazing I'll be a little bit invisible, but like, queer individuals within tech, and we kind of want to showcase that intersectionality. And I think the other aspect of it was my parents. I relate very much to what Alex said about how his parents kind of like, a lot of immigrants have this trauma that they keep within themselves of, America's a mean place. I think that's something that my parents say all the time. Like, you don't want them to be mean to you. And so you keep things like neurodivergence, you keep things like disability, like queerness within you, and you don't let it out, because that's the last thing you want to do. When I, when I was first more publicly out, my mom was like, I don't know if you think this will help you get a job, but it definitely won't, like in a lot of places. And so take this stuff off your LinkedIn, take this stuff off of like, and it wasn't even like I was going on LinkedIn and saying like, hey everyone, I'm queer, like hire me. It was more of like, I'm, an organizer for Queer Hacks. Like, this is something that I really care about. I'm advocating for my community. And there's just so much stigma around neurodivergence as well within South Asian communities. Like, mental health is something that still needs to be addressed, like seriously, very soon, because a lot of South Asian kids, and I'm sure other places, but from my experience, South Asian kids are they just don't. There's no conversation about depression or about anxiety, about OCD, ADHD, and it's really saddening, because I can't really. It took so long for me to get like a formal evaluation for anything, because my parents thought that I would be put in the for lack of a better word, like loony bin, if I like ever actually went and got an evaluation. These are my parents' words. These are my grandmother's words. I also can't really. I don't think I could ever tell my parents that I am like agender, or that I use they them pronouns, because they just would not understand. I've tried to explain it to them before, and they're just like, it's not possible. They really do understand the concept of, for example, like straight versus gay, or like man versus woman, and they like really still understand these binaries, but kind of the fluidity and flexibility that's inherent in sexuality and gender are just not something that they're comfortable with, or that they want to acknowledge, because they don't want me to have to deal with that. I think that's the primary thing. They're like, if they don't pay attention to it, I don't have to pay attention to it, and everything will be okay. So yeah, it kind of like, in summary, there's just a lot of ways in which I felt very empowered by intersectionality, especially because of like the vector of socioeconomic privilege and exposure to like technology. But at the same time, just the cultural elements of like my South Asian heritage, as well as like the lack of representation I saw of like queer individuals who kind of fit the mold of the traditional like Indian American male presenting engineer, were just not there.
Thank you so much for that. A lot of what you said really resonated with me, and has been my experience as well, as someone who is Indian and queer. Candace, I would love to hear from you about how intersectionality has impacted your life.
Yeah, definitely. So I think for me, intersectionality has been the most helpful in having like a more nuanced view of the way my identities have shaped me. So I'm a Black woman, and I think that's like pretty immediately apparent when people meet me. And so I'm also like, I think pretty outgoing, like pretty high energy. And even when I behave in ways that are similar to my peers, I can see how I'm often stereotyped for it. So like my peers who are white men would be told they're confident. And then for me, people will use words like aggressive. And it's definitely interesting, because I think I am hyper conscious about the way that I'm perceived in the workplace. And I've still been told I'm aggressive, which is like not a great feeling. It's interesting that we essentially tell people to change themselves just to sort of blend in. And I think that part can be really hard. And there's also parts of my identity that I don't volunteer as immediately. So like I'm an epileptic, I'm pan, and those are things that I usually don't really say in the workplace if I can avoid it, which is I think also kind of tough. So even in grad school, I don't think I really told most of my peers, and there are probably a good chunk of people I work with who still have like no idea. So I think I've noticed both the privilege of being able to sort of blend in some senses. So I can't really hide like my race or gender, but like my disability, I don't have to really tell people at first. So I think it's sort of it's an interesting balance that some parts are very, very salient and other parts are a bit more private. I think for me, and maybe this is similar for some of you as well, the things that I keep private, it's sort of out of self-protection. You have certain things that people will see immediately when they meet you, and the things that you don't have to share, you sort of want to hold on to. And so I felt that a lot. It's interesting too, because sometimes you sort of don't get immediately accepted into the in-group. People don't see you and they're like, oh, like, she's queer, hey, come join us. So I think that's been another interesting part.
Definitely. Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to actually what you say, sort of a few questions down about the visibility and invisibility bit. But before that, I would love to sort of dive straight into asking all of you who are all sort of intersectionally marginalized folks. You work in academia, you work in industry, you know, some of you work in NLP. What are the biggest missing pieces for you in terms of intersectionality? Is it representation? Is it having sort of a lack of community? Is it the fact that people around you don't get it and don't understand intersectionality in the same way that we have, because it is literally our lived experience? So yeah, I would love to hear from some of you about sort of what's missing. And Candace, I would love to sort of start with you. I know you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah. Also, I realize I'm like losing my voice. I hope I'm still able to be heard.
You are.
Thanks. Yeah, so I feel like the biggest missing piece for me is usually that sort of diversity or affinity orgs unintentionally, I hope, marginalize people at the intersection. And I think one of the best examples is like when I go to things that are like women in X, you know, what have you, they'll have events talking about how women are often perceived as very meek in the workplace and we should be more assertive. And that is just effectively at odds with me being a Black woman, because even being assertive by default, people are going to say that you're aggressive. And I have never really heard that acknowledged in spaces. And so it's, you know, it's kind of hard because you sort of feel like your identity is just never really talked about explicitly. Another good example, so like the Rising Stars programs, I think most departments in computer science have them. If you look at the past like 5 years, they have around 100 women each year, and there have been maybe 3 Black women. So a lot of times when we're really seeking to uplift women, we tend to forget about women of color. And like that's what I feel like tends to be missing a lot. Trying to think if there are other things I wanted to mention. That's probably the biggest thing. Our diversity orgs don't always do the best job of including people.
Yeah, definitely true. And I think Arjun, you also have found this to be the case, not only in your own experience, like you were talking about, but also in sort of your work at Queer in AI. I know that you, that Queer in AI ran a survey, sort of asking some of these questions about what are the missing pieces, and sort of asking about things like mental health, and representation and things like that. So I would love to hear from you. You know, you can pick and choose whether you want to talk about your own experiences or the Queer in AI survey or both. But I would love to hear from you what you think about sort of missing pieces around intersectionality.
Yeah, I think I'd love to talk about both, to be honest, but I'll start off with the Queer in AI survey results. So just like a 1-sentence, like succinct summary of like why we run this survey. We call it a demographic survey, and it's available on our website, queerinai.org. Go visit our website, please take it. It's to get a sense of how the queer community within AI feels, and in this way, like hear about the challenges, especially of trans, non-binary, and queer, Black, Indigenous, and Latinx folks within Queer in AI, and particularly address and do better to empower them within all the spaces that we host. And some statistics from the survey. We asked one question about mental health. And so the results so this is like check boxes. You can select multiple, and I'll kind of read off like the percentages of people who checked each box. So 80.3%, that's like 61 of our respondents, said that my ability to conduct research or participate in classes has been impaired by mental health issues. In addition, 38.2% have seriously considered or attempted suicide. Furthermore, 31.6% say that they've harmed themselves. 36.8% have said that conferences exacerbate my mental health problems. And 18.4% have said that I've had mental health crises at conferences. And like these numbers are very alarming. Like these are high percentages. And I mean, when you think about the conferences, there are just so many ways that conferences could improve within our field. it could be from small things like registration forms. We put up a inclusive conference guide recently. Like, why are we asking for like gender in a single like drop down? Like, people identify with so many different things. Why are you making them label their gender when signing up for a conference and associating that with their identity? Like, that's a very distressing experience for a lot of folks. And in addition, I mean, I'm kind of glad that we've moved away. I mean, just because things have been virtual, like, you know, the networking events with like drinking, like that's particularly dangerous for a lot of queer folks who have had turned to drinking. Like, and this is, you know, particularly my experience of like turning to drinking as a way to escape problems, as a way to even like avoid self-harm. And in addition to that, like, just the fact that queer people are very susceptible to sexual harassment and sexual assault, including especially at conferences, to be honest. Like bisexual women in particular, there's a survey that was done where it's like 28% or so of bisexual women said that they had experienced sexual harassment or sexual assault before, which is much higher than like, you know, a lot of the other numbers within our community, and all the numbers were already like pretty alarmingly high. So I'm going to present some more results for questions to Black, Indigenous, people of color. On a scale of 1 to 5, how well represented are queer BIPOC folks in your immediate work/research group? So 40% said 1, and 28% said 2, and all the other ones were very small percentages. On a scale of 1 to 5, how well represented are BIPOC folks in queer spaces you are part of? This includes queer NAI. So the majority of people, so 41.7% said at 3, kind of in the middle, and then the next largest number was 29.2% out of 4. So kind of leaning a little bit better than average. On a scale of 1 to 5, how often have you faced racism/microaggressions from white folks? And this one was a 1, so 32% for not having often faced racism, microaggressions from white folks. On a scale of 1 to 5, how often have you faced racism and microaggressions from white queer folks? And again, the kind of distribution was similar, a lot of 1s and 2s. I just wanted to quickly provide some examples of racism/microaggressions that people were comfortable sharing in this form. And I'm not associating anyone's identity with these, but people have mentioned, like, teachers asked them, when are you going back to your country? And even within queer spaces, they had, like, you know, a white queer individual say things like, you don't look Mexican, like as a compliment. I know, like, within, it's particularly toxic sometimes within like the communities, like cis gay men. They're like very high like beauty standards, and what I mean by beauty standards are like white beauty standards, like kind of like blonde, blue-eyed. Like that's the kind of thing that everyone's pushing for, and it's very, there's a lot of overt discrimination sometimes with when you don't fit that mold. Some other things like you know, picking the person last because their name is hard to pronounce. You know, other microaggressions like, can I use a nickname for you? Oh my God, that's like so annoying when people ask that because they can't pronounce your name. Like, you know, if you really want me on my team, you're gonna learn my name right now. It's like really terrible. This is another one, and last one I'm going to talk about that particularly resonated with me from my experiences I mentioned before. I've seen multiple times Indians around me pass homophobic comments when they think I'm straight. And this is at risk of generalization, of course. Like, this is a very general statement, but it does speak to a lot of people, like including myself, where when you're made part of like the in-group, people think that, and they don't know about your identities. They're like, cool, like this is a private place where we can trash talk like the LGBTQIA plus community and how, like, you know, crazy we think all of it is. And you're just like, oh no, like this is not really where I want to be. And now I don't feel very included, but I can't really risk myself and say that, you know, I identify with this and leave the in-group. It's just so comfortable there, right? And like, it's a very tough situation to be in. So about the initial question about biggest missing pieces for you in community, I kind of wanted to actually talk about veganism really quickly, and it may not sound very related, but there's this great book called Afroism. Highly recommend checking it out. And one of the things that they talk about is Black veganism. And it's about like how it's about the need for like a space for Black individuals within the vegan community. Veganism has existed in countries all over the world for like, centuries, for so long. And it seems like right now, like, especially in the US, like white people have rediscovered veganism like through this era of like fake meats. And it's become industrialized, and corporations have really been profiting off of the vegan food industry. And they don't make these things accessible to especially like Black and Latinx communities, because most of these people, because they're so socioeconomically oppressed, they're put into like areas with food deserts, and they can't get access to these products. And then they're made to feel bad that they're not vegan, because now veganism has become synonymous with this like level of like privilege or like level of care for the environment, when in reality, like animals and Black and Latinx individuals are all being exploited by capitalism. And I could go on a tangent like this forever, but the main point of all of this is we need more spaces like that in academia, where people shouldn't be questioning why you need like a space for Black vegans. Like clearly, like white people need to do the work to educate themselves on why this space is necessary. It's not like we're bringing race into veganism. We're not bringing race into academia. Like there are some very terrible intersectional experiences that a lot of individuals are living, that they're kind of like suffering through. And that's why we need these spaces. And we shouldn't have to explain it. Like we need community, and we're going to do that. And we're not going to spend most of our time telling white people why we need it. We're going to have it because it's for ourselves. We're advocating for our own like well-being. The other thing that I'd wanted to mention about academia industry is that it's been often very surprising to me how many people in positions of power, especially diversity inclusion advocates or like self-proclaimed diversity inclusion advocates, are not the most diverse or inclusive. Like I've had interactions with people at top conferences where I've experienced like gaslighting and tone policing. And these things are like, they really push you away from like wanting to participate, especially when they're coming from people with power in these conferences. And like, I know that this is something that at Queer in AI we've been very conscious of. Like a lot of brown queer individuals have been perceived as very aggressive, especially compared to like their white counterparts. So if we ever want to like make change, we often ask like the white queer folks in our organization to go email that person to request some kind of change, because like it just comes when we send an email, regardless of what we say, it very often comes off as like this person's just like cranky or angry, or like they don't really know what they're talking about. Like this could be resolved so much more nicely. And oftentimes we do take those steps to be like nice people, and nevertheless we're painted as aggressive. And then afterwards we sit there for like hours thinking about like, could I have said that more nicely? Should I really have apologized to this person? Yeah, it's very exhausting.
Yeah, I think so much of what you're saying resonates with me, and it also goes off of what Candace was talking about earlier. And it really sucks that we have to deal with that. And I think it's, nobody really talks about the fact that you deal with the impact of these things for a very long time after. Like you reflect on these interactions, and it sits with you. And sometimes for years, it still sort of comes back. Alex, I know that you have a lot of thoughts about specifically the way in which siloing is one of the missing pieces in a lot of like DEI orgs. So I would love for you to tell us more about that.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that I'm in total agreement with what Candace and Arjun have said. I think that, so yeah, as you mentioned, I think that if you look at the way equity groups are set up right now, they often are really siloed. And although many of these equity groups will say that intersectionality is important because it is a bit of a buzzword right now, when you actually look at the practices, like for example, one of the things that are cute a lot is that we would say, this is not a race issue, it is a queer issue, or this is not really a disability issue, it is a class issue, things like that, right? So they're not actually really paying attention to intersectionality. And on a personal level, what that means is that whenever we enter these spaces, that you always feel like you're leaving a part of yourself behind, right? So like, for example, like you just feel like you have to hide just aspects of yourself in order to move into that dominant culture. But the thing that really frustrates me more about that on a systematic level is that it makes me feel that the work that we're doing is not as effective as it could be, because I think that people have gotten so used to siloing the issues that they don't seem to realize that work that uplifts the most marginalized people inside of any given community is work that really uplifts us all, right? So for example, one issue that I think has been really siloed, and I think that I really like talking about this issue right now because it's all happening to us right now, is that I report out for many years before the pandemic, disability activists have been advocating for online conferences, right? And for whatever reason, that, well, for example, disability activists did not get much support from racial groups or from queer groups or whatever then. And one of the things I'll point out is that we were often told that it's impossible to do this, but then obviously the pandemic hit, and then we're all doing it right now, right? So it was never really about how difficult. I mean, it was a difficult thing to do for sure. It's never really about it being impossible. It was just about the well-being though, and like the activism and drive and community being there to drive it, right? But one of the things I point out is that move to online conferences is not something that has just benefited disabled people solely. So for example, you have to think about people who have child or elder care responsibilities. All of a sudden now they can attend these conferences, right? People who have financial constraints, or people, I mean, even in just general, like just think about people who are in the boundaries between fields, and maybe they don't want to go to a full conference for one specific topic, but now they can hop in and out of different online conferences, right? So one of the things I would say is that when we focus upon the most marginalized in the communities, and when we focus upon like the connection between communities, work that benefits one community is often work that benefits, not only the most marginalized people in the community, but everyone else who have just needs different from the norm inside of the community. And there was this really great idea in disability that I like to expose to people to, and it's called universal design. And essentially, it says something similar. So basically, the canonical example of universal design is a cup curve, right? So basically, the slope that we put on a sidewalk, so it eases into the pavement and road then. And so that is often advertised as an accessibility accommodation for people who are in wheelchairs. But if you think about that, it's not just people in wheelchairs that it benefits. So for example, if you are using a stroller, if you have a shopping cart, if you are hauling luggage to the airport, those are like all of those people benefit from a cup curve, right? So when we make our society more physically accessible, it also makes it more accessible to everyone around us. And I think that the same thing also happens with our social infrastructure. So we're so often used to putting people in boxes and saying, okay, we're designing this initiative to target you. But the reality is that I just don't think people really belong or fit neatly in those boxes, right? Initiatives that help one set of people, and maybe intentionally targeted towards one set of people, usually have ripple effects that impact a lot of different communities and a lot of different people then.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I really like what you said about how initiatives for sort of one group of people often have an impact that's much greater than that. And that's very true, and definitely something that I've been thinking about a lot in the pandemic. I realized that we have sort of 20 minutes left, and I really wish that we could talk about this for longer than an hour. So I may sort of ask for questions to be sort of redirected to people on Twitter perhaps, or over email, because I know that we still have a bunch of things that, you know, we want to talk about that are really interesting, because I had people fill out a doc beforehand and talk about the things that they want to, you know, discuss at this panel. So I want to sort of make sure that you all get a chance to talk about that. The sort of next piece that I want to talk about, some of you have touched on this earlier, is that there are aspects of your identity that are more visible. So Candace, you had mentioned that, you know, you're a Black woman. This is really obvious to people when they see you. And then there are some sort of invisible aspects that it's sort of possible to mask or hide. And you know, there's varying degrees as well of this. So for example, you know, my name gives away some information about ethnicity, but I've found that people who interact with me on Twitter or only over text don't usually make the same assumptions about my language competence as when people have heard my accent and have sort of figured out, you know, okay, Z has brown skin and Z sort of doesn't speak with a North American English accent. And then they sort of make some assumptions that I must not be fluent because of that, which is frankly racist. And so I guess I'm curious, you know, for all of you about the sort of visible and invisible parts of your identities, you know, how do they differ in terms of your experiences? And, you know, within DEI orgs, how does this sort of play with intersectionality? You know, are the more visible parts addressed more often than the less visible parts? And, you know, just kind of any challenges that you'd want to highlight. So, so Candace, I would love to start with you.
Yeah, sounds great. So you made me think, actually. I think names are interesting because my name is Candace Ross, which I think people usually can't guess my race. My middle name is Sharonda. And so whenever that is visible, like on emails or things like that, it actually does give me pause where I'm a little bit afraid people can sort of start to stereotype me, which is kind of unfortunate. I like my middle name, but that's such a good point. You made me think about that. But yeah, so in terms of sort of the less visible parts of my identity, I think the two most salient are sexuality and like epilepsy. So sort of having that. And so it's interesting because I resonate with some things that Alex had mentioned. So when I started grad school, I just didn't really want to tell anyone I had epilepsy, which frankly didn't make sense because I had multiple seizures like every single day, everywhere I went, like walking to work, in my office, at home, at the grocery store, everywhere. And I realized that I think maybe part of me not wanting to share was because the Blackness was so salient, being a woman was so salient. I had pretty intense imposter syndrome coming into MIT already. I think I was just like, this will be something else. I don't want to feel like it's another thing. And it was honestly probably not the safest thing. Like you want people to know that you might have a seizure. So like looking back in hindsight, I really wish I could be like sort of tell my younger self to just share more. And I think thinking back to your question, the other big thing is sexuality. And I think, again, just very self-protective. And it's a big part of the reason why in workspaces, I virtually never share that with people, which is interesting, even like having a partner of many, many years. I think a lot of people don't even know that about me. I hope I'm answering your question, but I think a lot of it is just being like aggressively self-protective and sort of just holding on to those things that people don't immediately see. And you mentioned earlier, it's a big burden, and it is kind of tough because I actually really loved connecting with people and sharing myself with people. And so it's hard seeing places in life where I feel like I can't always just come in and just be my like most authentic self.
Definitely. Yeah. I've really liked, you know, knowing you on Twitter. Yeah, I think it's definitely, there's different approaches that people take. And I think Alex, you have a different approach. I really liked what you are sort of, I'm foreshadowing here. But I think what you were going to say about sort of strength in numbers and solidarity. So yeah, so do you want to tell us about sort of visibility, invisibility, and what this sort of means to you?
Sure. And just to riff off of the name thing quickly, and
Yeah.
my name isn't that visible too, right? And actually, I think this is a really interesting point because if you look at Chinese immigrant culture, there's this habit of naming like your second generation kids after like the most banal right names possible. So there's a lot of, I don't know, like, okay, there was like 20 Jessicas that I know that are Asian everything. And I think really that comes back like to like the impulse to, you know, protect and insulate your kids from racism, right? So that's a thing. That's definitely a thing. But anyway, yes. So going back to what you're saying, I definitely do have a very different approach. And one of the things I want to emphasize is that that is definitely a really personal thing. So I'm not saying that everyone should follow my approach. This is not a call to action or anything. I think the personal calculus between what you gain and how much you're penalized for being open about your identity is just so personal that I just cannot say for you whether anyone should do or not. But I do know that being in many different occupying many different marginalized identities has helped shape some of my decisions around like being visible or not, right? And one of the things that I've learned is that invisibility has a cost associated with it, and that is different depending upon what identity you inhabit, right? So for example, as a queer person, I can choose to be invisible at a conference or work or whatever, and that does have a certain cost to it. But if you compare it to, for example, as a deaf person, if I choose to be invisible at a conference and work, what does that look like? It means essentially going without an interpreter and not really being visible with my disability. So the cost that I pay for being invisible as a deaf person is that I just can't really be meaningfully engaged or really participate in anything at all, right? Whereas cost as a queer person means that, well, yes, I have to have certain aspects of myself. So I'm not putting my full self to this conference or whatever, but it does mean that I can still participate at some extent, at least. So basically, I think that depending upon who you are and what your identity is, you will have to pay different costs for invisibility. And of course, some people can't hide it at all, right? So with that in mind, one of my personal values around this is that, well, I'm always aware that people are paying different costs for me in being invisible or not. And sometimes those costs may be so good that they cannot be invisible, or as I mentioned, they cannot be invisible just by default, the nature of their identity, right? So when it comes to my identities that are more invisible, like one of the reasons that I choose to be more visible about it is because I think that it is really difficult for me to see other people as being, you know, like a single nail that sticks out, right? I think there is some kind of strength and solidarity in numbers. So if, you know, like I see that, I also want to be like the second nail that sticks out, because now I think that sends a message. It's not any individual's fault. So it's not that person's fault that did not conform to what your ideas of, you know, like a scientist is, or as, you know, like a graduate student or a researcher is done. It's just that we're just all naturally diverse. We bring different needs to the table and everything. And so I think that it becomes more of a systematic issue and emphasizes to those in charge, not just those in charge, but those who are also marginalized and looking for people out there who are like them, that it is a systematic issue and that there are people like them out there in the world, right? So I think this is like the really powerful part of visibility. And I think that it's also important to think, like, I think it's important to think about like how visibility impacts you as a personal decision and the penalties that you pay for it. But I think it's also important to think about what you contribute to community by being visible then.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that, you know, definitely it's every person's decision, but it's often so hard to sort of balance the competing needs of like, wow, well, everyone is coming out so publicly and you know, doing it in a certain way, and there's pressure. In fact, I just had a conversation, you know, a week or two ago with someone who said that he's known for a while that he's not straight, but he feels pressure to sort of come out because everyone else around him is so sort of out and open, but he doesn't really want to. And you know, really it is everybody's choice to sort of make on their own, because there is such a big cost, especially when you sit at the intersection of identities in this interesting way. And of course, if Nikita had been here, she would have talked about how her queerness and her Indianness often feel like they're at odds with each other. And that's certainly been my experience as well. And I think that relates a lot to this, sort of decision. Like there's so much complexity associated with a decision like this. So Arjun, I would love to hear from you about sort of invisibility. I know you have some feelings, especially sort of with the intersection of queerness and disability. And so, yeah, I would love for you to tell us about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say though, like Alex and Candace, I just love being here and like listening to both of you. Like I could do this for hours. It's just great content. But I kind of wanted to, I really agree with one thing that Alex said in particular about remembering that identities are not monolithic. Again, our experiences are not monolithic either. I feel like we've gotten a lot better about that society with like something like race, but with like disability, you know, we look at it and we're like, I mean, not every disabled person has the same experiences. And so you can't, like accommodations, this general term is not really like, you know, we need to really be thinking about individual disabilities and tailoring it to the individual. But I kind of want to add a little bit more complexity to this idea of like visible versus invisible identities, because I just like add two words to it. Like there are definitely identities which are always going to be visible, like they're extremely hard to conceal. But I feel like every invisible identity that we have is not something that you can just easily like make invisible. It's something you work to make invisible. Like you really try very hard to conceal your queerness or your neurodivergence. Because like, I mean, if you have like, I talk about these things with people all the time. I mean, not publicly often, but like within my group of friends. And to go to a conference and not bring up this part of your identity and like actively be like consciously thinking about like making sure that you don't say anything that reveals this is very difficult. So you still are putting in work. It's not just like invisible. It's like something you're making invisible. So I wanted to quickly talk about like the stigma around like OCD within academia and all other kinds of like neurodiversity, to be honest. It's just very difficult to talk about these things, and I still struggle with this because like there's unlike queerness, which has been like quote unquote demedicalized, like there are a lot of the disabilities like you get a formal evaluation for it, and so it still sounds like a medical thing to me, to be honest, even though I've lived with this and it's become a part of my identity. So I'm scared to talk about it because it's like that's one of those things where it's like, oh, like will this impede your ability to work? And like I wish people saw it as more as part of their identity. I'm slowly starting to kind of understand this like radical idea that yes, it's really difficult at times to like live with the disability, but what is sometimes more disabling is like the social effects of people realizing that you have a disability. But yeah, like even though things like OCD and ADHD are like things that you can supposedly like make invisible, it's very difficult because when you live with these things, there's constant like intrusive thoughts, like there's fixations, things that are like seemingly irrational. Like, I'd be like cleaning stuff all the time. And like, even if something was clean, I was like, wait, what happens if like while I was doing that last step, I made it dirty again? And then like kind of I went through and it seems like something that can be made invisible, but I do have to work very hard to do it. And it's also put strains on my productivity and relationships. And then on top all of that off, I've had tons of conversations where, you'll go up to someone and you've talked to them about OCD before, and they're like, oh, I completely forgot about that. You just seem so normal. And I'm like, that's totally a microaggression because like what do you want me to look like? Like, just because I don't talk about it constantly and because it's not immediately clear to you, this is something that's like plaguing my mind very regularly. So I'm sorry that you can't see it, but like it's still there. And the last thing I want to mention about the invisibility thing is, how like there's this, like when people experience microaggressions, it's like you probably get bystander training where you're told to, like in private, ask the person if it's okay if you bring this up with someone in power, and then go and talk to them about it. And this is like very common for like racial microaggressions or like sexist microaggressions. But like when the person's like identity is invisible, like what do you do then? This is a question that I ask a lot of people. Like if you hear things like, that's like so OCD, like all the time, like what do you do then? Do you go talk to the person? But they kept it invisible for so long, it's not like immediately clear. It's like a very complex situation. That's something that I'd like everyone to just think about. Like, what would you do in that situation?
Yeah, I really like that. I love the array of things that we're discussing here. And I'm really glad that, you know, this is the sort of set of panelists that we have on this panel. Like you're all amazing. And you're saying such wonderful things. So we're sort of coming up on time. So what I'm going to ask all of you to do is in 2 to 3 sentences, tell me sort of what you would like, what's sort of your vision for the future. You know, what would you like to see? What are like your calls to action for academia or industry or community, maybe as solutions to the missing pieces, or just to sort of make you feel like your intersectional identities are really addressed in the context of DEI. So Alex, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I'll say is that I want to remind everyone that the tools of oppression are just not creative. So you see them being repeated over and over again, right? So just to reference something Arjun said before about like the pathologization and medicalization of disability, I think to some extent, like disabled people benefit from that. But if you look at the way pathologization has been used as a tool historically, it's been a way to say, well, these are identities that are distinct and abnormal from us, and therefore we don't have to really deal with them and integrate it into a normal framework. And one of the really interesting things is that I think a lot of identities can relate to that, right? It's not that long ago than when being homosexual or transgender was part of a DSM as like an actual mental illness, right? And if you go back, like for example, there was this history of like women being called like they're saying that they have that they have this disability of hysteria. And there was also like, for example, the pathologization of Black women's bodies and about like the shape and curvature of the bodies, right? So I think we really need to keep in mind that whereas like certain identities may be oppressed or subject to certain tools at a certain time, the overall set of tools out there is not all of that creative, and you see the same like different communities being subjected to tools at different times. So it's really important for us to, I think, look at the history and then think about dismantling these tools. It's like, for example, if we're going to dismantle pathologization for disabled people, that's not dismantling it for disabled people alone. That's dismantling a tool that has been systematically being used against so many different communities. And we will see this coming up over and over again and being used against different communities in the future, right? So just keep in mind that oppression is not creative in that respect.
Absolutely, yeah. I want to get Candace and Arjun to also sort of say their calls to action. Candace, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think so. I guess briefly, I want people to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I think when people are so afraid of saying the wrong thing, they avoid the conversations altogether. So my call to action would be for people, particularly in power, to be really comfortable just in the discomfort.
Yeah, I love that. And Arjun?
Yeah, I just really love to see, you know, people in power, especially in institutions, like learn about these things on their own volition and not rely on like marginalized communities to do the educating for them, and just to generally understand, stop seeing everything so neoliberally, right? Like not as like protected groups or whatever, like strategic diversity, like those things are absolutely crap. Like actually understand experience at the intersection and learn on your own.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I have absolutely loved this conversation, and I hope that the sort of attendees enjoyed it as well. I will redirect any of your questions to the panelists, and you can also sort of find them on Twitter or through their websites, which are posted on the NAACL blog. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your conference.